Dear Mom and Dad, your daughters have been here for 3 months.
Must feel like years for you.
We've made new friends, discovered new things, had some fun.
Oh, and most importantly, we learned a lot.
Ah, yes, lots of learning.
Mostly, we learned the world can be pretty shitty.
Especially for those like us.
With diverse perspectives and stories,
But share the trait of identifying as female.
Now, I remember Cape Town.
Beautiful Cape Town.
Mountains looming on the horizon.
Cradling the vast, shimmering ocean.
Mystical beauty. Distracting from the gloom of settlements.
Little tin houses packed together.
People living shoulder to shoulder.
Strong testimony from a local woman in the LGBTI community speaking to the injustices living in Cape Town.
Women still looked down upon because of their gender.
Silence in the presence of men in Parliament and on city streets.
Then, in Joburg, we are on our way to Santon.
Massive buildings, luxury cars, people plucked from fashion magazines.
We passed through Alexandra.
Poverty, tired feet, ragged hand-me-down clothing.
Never understood until we saw the dichotomy ourselves.
Enjoying ourselves at a fancy restaurant at the mall.
Being served by a black woman, knowing that she will have to go back home on the other side of the bridge.
But we sit laughing, trying to ignore the harsh realities surrounding us.
Apartheid.
Still living, breathing, when we used to only understand it from history books.
Our fists clenched, mouths spat indignation.
How can they drive past here every day?
But were our towns in the U.S. much different? Are our towns in the U.S. much different?
Segregation, racial ghettos, people living in homes no bigger than sheds.
People of color working all hours of the day to get a meager wage.
Streets filled with trash from the lack of sanitation services.
A strong stench arises from the rubble.
Men created this mess we live in.
Mentally and physically.
Men rule and ruin the earth, just like they do women.
They lived a life of fear.
Fear of poverty.
Fear of gunshots.
Fear of death.
Black women in Southern Africa and the United States were the most oppressed.
Difficulty finding a job that can sustain a living.
Trying to feed children with nothing.
Trying to find refuge in those small, innocent faces, knowing that they don't fully grasp the horror they are living in.
Religious leaders, who so many revered, trusted, didn't help.
There was no refuge for women in the church.
There was no room for the voice of women in the church,
as
its theology was written by men.
Through their children, instead of the church, women found hope.
And they started to fight back.
The struggles began.
Rosa Parks refused to stand up, but instead stood with millions of Americans fighting injustice.
Anna Kurukari Mungunda sparked the women's voice in the liberation struggle in Namibia.
Leaders of these movements were men, powerful, wise, rebels.
But what would the movement have been without the will, the moral determination of the women?
Whipping words into weapons, battling for the voiceless.
Today, black women's voices still rise.
Crying for a voice.
Crying for justice.
And the day is coming when justice will reign.
Over Namibia.
Over the United States.
Over the world.
A world of equality for the oppressed.
The impoverished.
The people banished to settlements and ghettos.
Women have been oppressed through the ages, but the world is starting to turn.
We are rising from the deep crevice of voicelessness in which we have been trapped.
A time will come when women can stand in a synagogue, mosque, or church and preach to their fellow believers without being silenced.
A time will come when men will stop abusing women like they abuse the earth.
A time will come when women can get the same job as men and earn the same wage regardless of the shade of her skin.
A time will come when women are not only treated as equals, but also respected and acknowledged in any and every conversation.
A time will come when women will boost the workforce and pull themselves and others out of poverty.
Mom, Dad, we want you to know this world is hurting.
Women are hurting.
And it's time that justice is served.
And we will not stop